Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 205, and we're going to talk about Yaroslav Hunka, keyboard warriors, and Washington's farewell address, or at least an excerpt from it. Just a little bit of FYI, if you've been following along, I just got an email from my lawyer in my arbitration against my old university, former employer. And my hearing has been pushed back to February. So I guess it's like the sixth new date. So I guess we're not even waiting for the date to come close before they push it back. And there it is, right? Originally, it was supposed to be, they gave me two choices, two dates. It was going to be November or January, and now it's February. This is never going to get resolved. Anyway, so let's get to it. Yaroslav Hunka. I don't know if you remember that name. I'm pretty sure I'm saying it close to, unless I'm supposed to put an accent on it, but it's close to the way it's supposed to be. It's been a year, but old Hunka there, 98 years old last year, so he's 99 if he's still alive. He got a standing ovation in the Canadian Parliament, the House of Commons. He was invited by Anthony Rota, who is, I guess, Speaker of the House. And he got standing ovation twice. And it was because Zelensky, or like I like to call him, Zenazi, he was here in North America visiting Canada to, you know, get some more money so he can buy some more houses in other countries. And it turns out that Hunka was a Nazi, right? So they were celebrating him because he fought against the Russians in World War II. And the first time I heard that, I was like, wait a minute, what? And it was just so ridiculous that I thought I read it wrong. But no, no, no. He fought against the Russians. He was a Ukrainian fighting against the Russians, which makes him a Nazi, right? So it took a while, but the Canadians figured it out as well. And so how did this happen? Well, because Canada and Canadians and all these people who are so anti-Russia, so anti-Putin, right? That they'll just look for anything anti-Putin without realizing that, well, Nazis were against the Soviet Union back in World War II, but they didn't put the thing together, right? They're just so consumed with their single-mindedness against Nazis that it was pretty embarrassing, right? So you know, people will literally become Nazis because they hate a person so much, right? So I guess that's okay when it's uh that's the good time. That's a good time to become a Nazi. Someone I knew from college, actually, I don't even remember him from college, but somehow he knows me. We have same friends. I recognize his last name, but otherwise I didn't know him. I was a zero. I was a social zero. He was probably a frat brother, very popular with everybody. And he accused me of being a Putin cheerleader because I pointed out that the guy they were cheering was a Nazi, right? And and he was also, and that Nazi, that particular Hunka, he was very much into this war because of who the Ukrainians were. And of course, we all know by now that the Ukrainians fighting against the Russians right now in the Ukrainian war are people who are Nazis, right? They're neo-Nazis, right? They're for a very pure Ukraine, so they wanted to get rid of the ethnic Russians from Ukraine. So I thought it was kind of funny. But being anti-Nazi does not mean one is pro-Putin. And it's just kind of weird how people who say this kind of stuff that's their logic, right? Oh, if you're not anti-Putin, then you're pro-Putin, right? So, or if I'm not saying I'm anti-Putin, then I'm pro-Putin. I was just merely pointing out that I'm anti-Nazi, and the person who they were applauding and cheering and supporting and defending was in fact a Nazi. So one is willing to become a Nazi because you hate someone enough. Now, So that was that. And I looked it up because it was a year ago, and then I said, oh, I wonder what happened to that guy. And so I looked it up. And you can't use Google, so I use presearch.com to get a more, because I don't want to go through several pages of Google results, have to sift through all that propaganda first. So I use Presearch when it becomes a tricky topic. And Presearch kicked out right away that February of the following year, Trudeau invited him again. He invited Hunka again because Zenazi was coming to Canada again. And so he wanted him to hang out with them, best buds, Nazis. So Trudeau knew, right? So when it came out last year, September of 2023, that they were applauding a Nazi, he's like, "Oh, how could this happen? I didn't know." Well, his embarrassment was that people busted him. In typical leftist fashion, I guess, he pretended to be embarrassed, but in reality, he was just embarrassed that he was caught. So February of 2024, he invited Hunka again. And so one might argue, well, maybe Trudeau isn't himself a Nazi, but he knows they are. So why would you keep inviting them? So if the United States was consistent, then the US would say, oh, we have you know, a Nazi threat, a fascist threat on our northern border. We got to start bombing Canada. Yeah, but we're not. So that tells you a few things. But it also should give you a hint or a clue as to how people would feel if you were living in the Middle East in a country like Canada and you have leaders who are going to be so boneheaded that they're going to celebrate Nazis, and all of a sudden you have US bombing them, right? So that's how you radicalize people. That's how we are promoting and fostering terrorism and radical Islam all over the world, right? People don't remember or they don't realize that a lot of these countries that are now radical Muslim countries, like extremely anti-West, anti-American Muslims, were very moderate, right? Even Indonesia. I've seen pictures where women several decades ago were not wearing the hijab, but now they are, right? And so this neoconservatism within Islam, yeah, that's pretty much the United States foreign policy. So you have all of this going on, a lot of killing. I'm laughing only because I'd be crying otherwise because it's so freaking pathetic. But at the same time, you get these keyboard warriors, right, who are going to call me the Nazi, the dictator sympathizer, whatever. And of course, talk is cheap or typing is cheap. Anyone can type, anyone can be macho, anyone can pretend. And I'm not, under any kind of delusion that if I were to meet that person from college, he probably could kick my butt, maybe. I mean, we're old people now. And I remember he might have been a lot bigger than me. So I don't know. He could probably take me. I wouldn't be able to defend myself, right? So I'm not trying to be macho or anything, but I think it's kind of interesting that he is. He's all about standing with Ukraine and all that other kind of stuff. And it got to the point where he was like, "Oh yeah, let's go." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "Let's go to Ukraine." I'm like, "Send your kid. You're the one who's so into it. Send your kid." And he was like, "Oh, he'd never go. He's too lazy, but I'll go." And I'm like, "Well, go. I'm not stopping you, right?" And that's the thing. In a free society, if you feel that strong, you can go if you want. I don't feel that strong, and so I'm going to sit right here and try to convince as many people uh, that they shouldn't go, that this is not a good idea. This is a lost cause, in fact. And it turns out, of course, unfortunately, these kinds of things, it requires a lot of time to be vindicated, right? Like I said this when it first started, and when I was down at school, and it upset some people, but you had to point out to them that there was a coup in 2014, the Orange Revolution. And it was interesting. I mentioned this before, but I had a Ukrainian student who was actually part of that movement. Her mom helped hand out sandwiches to the people who were, trying to get rid of that popularly elected government. And so they were part of that whole, pro-Ukrainian purity movement. And they supported the war. And I have discussions. I was like, look, this is just going to end up in a lot of death. And it turns out I was right. Unfortunately, for me to be shown to be right, we had to lose all those people in the battleground, right? And the United States is a couple $1 trillion even more in debt, and that's not a good thing. So few people actually do get up and go, and those who actually do go to the Ukraine probably regret it tremendously because war today is not what the movies are like from back in the day, right? These people have drones that fly 24/7, as I mentioned the other day. And so I used to type out these long, detailed, carefully crafted essays to explain my position. No, I'm not a Nazi. No, I don't support Putin. No, I'm pro peace. And I would try to explain to these guys. And they would respond almost right away. Like, so I would spend a couple hours crafting this really sort of subtle yet delicate and sensitive response to try to ease them into the idea of freedom because I know they're so emotional, so wrapped up in their subjectivity. But they never read it, right? Uh, and instead, what they do is have little platitudes and superficial remarks, maybe a cliche or a meme, even, uh, where they will try to absolve themselves of any kind of guilt and defend the indefensible, right? So they're mindless about all of this violence. They're completely ignorant of what it's like, who gets hurt, what the cost of all of this is. And they do it by trying to be virtuous, right? Virtue signaling. That's why I find it's so disgusting to me. I'm so repulsed by all of this virtue signaling because it's so cheap, right? It's so cheap, right? So you got this nice looking covering, and inside it's like a sausage meme, right? I don't know if you guys have seen the sausage memes that are going around. And in case to save you a little trouble to Google it, the British Prime Minister said something like, return our sausages now. But he meant to say hostages, right? But he said sausage instead. And so there were a lot of memes going around. And it's funny, that's virtue signaling too, because Israel really doesn't care about hostages, right? They have Hannibal, the Hannibal directive, right? That if they're taken hostage, they're dead, right? And so you don't really make any serious effort to get them back. So you have that. So sort of get a few here and there, but ultimately you really don't care. Uh, so people read all this stuff, they hear all this stuff, but they don't understand anything. And I noticed this first when I was teaching it in college. I would read together with the entire class. I would say, read with me this line. And then I would ask them, what does it mean? And it was pretty obvious, right? You see the words on the page, and if you know what the words mean, then you know that what it's saying is not what a lot of people are interpreting it to be. But I would sit there and I would say, what does this mean? And no one could answer. And so it's this phenomena where people are reading, but they have no comprehension. And so having seen that, and then the first couple of days here in this middle school, we would do the same thing. I would read in class and I would say, what does this mean? And no one understood. It could have been in Korean, right? Because that's how we were when we were younger. We knew how to read. We knew what the sounds were. We had no idea what we were reading. And that's the feeling that I got teaching these students who are reading in English, who speak English. They had no idea what they were reading. And so that's what I focus on now is, comprehension. So reading comprehension, right? So comprehending what they're reading. So a lot of it is analysis. And I do that even with the sixth graders because I do that with my kids. Like we read it and then I ask them, what do you think it means? And we do that. It takes a while, but you know, at least with my eighth graders now, I've done it 2 years with them. This is the second year with, and they catch on real quick, right? And so I'm hoping by the time these sixth graders become eighth graders as well, that they'll become monsters when it comes to analytical thinking. I'm hoping for too much, but anyway, on that note, this morning I don't know how, but I saw something and it made me think of the Washington's farewell address. And so I downloaded it and I was reading through it. And here's a line, and it really is a wonderful little excerpt. And so I'm going to read it to you. It's a very short piece. This is Washington in his farewell address. History and experience prove that foreign influence is one of the most baneful foes of Republican government. Right. So foreign interests, right? Entangling alliances. It's the worst thing for a Republican government, which is what the United States had, a Republican government. I continue. Excessive partiality for one foreign nation and excessive dislike of another cause those whom they actuate to see danger only on one side and serve to veil and even second the arts of influence on the other. Real patriots who may resist the intrigues of the favorite are liable to become suspected and odious, while its tools and dupes usurp the applause and confidence of the people to surrender their interests. End quote. So what's going on here? Well, because some people also are going to benefit from this foreign influence, right? That if the United States does go along with this foreign influence, they are going to reap a lot of money. And so they're going to present an argument to the American people, to the American government that is extremely partial, biased, right? One-sided. And they're going to present it, right? One subjectivity and ignore everything else. And so they're going to pitch this argument. It's all good. They don't tell you anything about the risk. They don't tell you anything at all about the downside, the potential negatives. Oops, excuse me. The potential negatives, the potential negative outcomes, right? They're just going to focus only on the potential positive, right? And so anyone who tries to tell you, hey, look, there's another side of the story. There are serious risks with getting into this war, with, helping this side as opposed to that side. I mean, there are serious things that we have to talk about here. And those people are going to be suspected and they will become odious, right? They'll become so hated by everybody else. I mean, people might even call you a Putin lover or whatever, right? When you're trying to tell people, hey, this is simply not the way to go. And those people who support all of that propaganda, that foreign influence propaganda, they are going to be applauded. People are going to trust them. They're going to like, you are such a hero. You're the patriot, right? And in the process, they surrender their freedom. They surrender their interests. They surrender the purchasing power of their dollars, right? And that's what Washington was saying in his farewell address. It was a pretty long farewell address, right? It must have gone on for at least an hour. But so we simplify it by talking about entangling alliances, that in order to engage in those alliances, we have to do propaganda full force, maybe even have a false flag attack, have someone attack us, right? So we're going to put our troops in harm's way, sort of as bait, right? And wait for other countries to kill some American soldiers overseas. And then we go to Congress and we say, oh, look, see, they're so evil. They killed some of our troops, right? And then we have war. And that's what the United States has been doing for the last few weeks, if not months, if not years, trying to provoke a war, which is insane. It's just so absolutely, utterly insane. I think back on that meme when Trump was trying to be reelected the first time he was running against Joe Biden. And so you have that woke left meme where it says, oh no, we can't elect Donald Trump again because he's going to start World War III. And then Biden wins. And so the meme goes, oh, let's start World War III. It's just so idiotic. It's beyond asinine. I can't get my head around it, right? And so there's that line that history says, right? Don't let me repeat myself, right? History tells us, but we always do. We always let history repeat. And that's because we don't see how the manipulation happens, how people are going to play with words and manipulate people's perceptions and subjectivities to make it seem that evil behavior is actually good. But for the rest of us who are aware and perhaps listen to this podcast, we got to keep fighting the good fight, right? We got to stay righteous, right? In the secular sense, and that is we have to stay pro-peace. The future will vindicate us. It will. Unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of pain before we are vindicated. I firmly believe that because it is the truth. And so our battle is not for glory, it's not for riches, but it's for peace and it's for happiness. And, the whole world may go to crap, but if you stay righteous, you will always have that, no matter how much people will demonize you. Uh, and speaking from experience, right? So I know that it's true. And you try to share that happiness, you try to share that peace with as many people as possible. And one thing I'll add, I know I'm a little bit long here, but one thing I always tell my kids, it's not that you're going to try to convert someone or wake someone up in 5 minutes. It just generally doesn't work that way. It would work for someone like me, but for everyone else who are so deep in that cave, that dark cave, and they've only been looking at shadows all their life, making them shining the bright light in their faces just doesn't happen. So you got to lead them out, right? And you got to sort of slowly get them to change their subjectivity, right? And so I always tell them, drop breadcrumbs, play the long game, right? Because Lord willing, we're going to live for a while. And so you want to, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, give them the means and the direction to get out of this mess, right? And keep remembering the future will vindicate us. That's it for today. I will talk to you next time.